Hello, dear friends, dear Jesuit alumni friends from all over the world. Welcome in our brand new Jesuit alumni conversations. It is my privilege, my honor, and I have to say my pleasure to welcome you all for this first attempt at uniting globally Jesuit alumni. And it is my great pleasure to welcome also in this live session, Father Bill Muller. Father Bill, hello.
Hello, Alain. How are you?
Father Bill, you are spiritual counselor of WUJA, so we know each other for a couple of years now. We have seen each other 5 or 6 times, and we came across the idea to have you as a first guest speaker in those Jesuit alumni conversations. Now, Father Bill, I'd like to start on this 20th of May on a special note. We know that a few hours ago, Father Adolfo Nicolas, 38th Superior General of the Society of Jesus, passed away. I think he was a most remarkable man, a very amicable person. I had the chance to meet him 5 or 6 times, but I think, Father Bill, you have had many more interactions with him. Could you tell us a little bit more about Adolfo Nicolas?
Sure, I'd be glad to. What a fine, wonderful superior he has been through many, many years. He was provincial. He's done a lot of different kinds of works in the society, missionary. But his 8 years as our superior general were marked, I think, by two words that he kept saying over and over and over again. One is the universality of our Jesuit vocation and the Jesuit works, and depth. Depth. We need to find an intellectual and spiritual depth in what we do. But yeah, just a grand fellow. I had a number of opportunities to be with him, but my favorite, I was in the Miami International Airport waiting for a plane to El Salvador. I had arrived from Washington, D.C., where I live and work, and he and his assistant, Father Doug Macouye, had arrived from Rome. And we had a couple of hours to twiddle our thumbs before we got on the plane to go to El Salvador for a meeting of the provincials of Canada and the United States and a meeting of the provincials of Latin America. So at one point, Father General says, let's go for a walk. So we just spent half an hour walking around the airport, just the two of us. And he told me the story of a giraffe. And it was his image of how he thinks we all ought to be. Because a giraffe has its feet on the ground, but sees over the petty squabbles and the differences of opinion, and can see over all of that to see into the future, to have a vision for what lies ahead. And that, he of course, he told me this, tugging on my arm with a glint in his eye and a little smile. I don't know whether he was thinking I was a 4th grader who needed an image like that, or whether I think really some depth there. So I've carried that with me for the past few years. Gosh, the feet on the ground, but see over what's going on today so that you can see what's happening tomorrow. My other favorite story, I was at one point, some years ago, I was the president of a Cristo Rey school in South Los Angeles, in Watts. And he was making a visit to California right after, a couple of months after he was elected Superior General. So I greeted him with a couple of students when he got out of the car. And the students were showing him around, and the students were terrific and wonderful. And he was so kind and gracious to them. And then when he was leaving, I said, Father General, if you're going to spend so much energy and time over the next couple of weeks, you're going to be sorry you came, because this is going to take a lot of time and energy. How do you do it? Well, he grabbed my arm and he said, "Don't be so sure. I'm enjoying this more than you can tell." So maybe it was his first escape from Rome after he had been superior general. But again, the look on his face, the glint in his eye, the little smile, a man of great depth, but a man of great joy too. The joy of the risen Lord, the joy of the gospel. Just wonderful, wonderful memories that many of us will carry with us for a long time.
Yes, Father Bill, and this reminds me that he was indeed a man of depth. We all know that the general, of course, who coined the famous words, men and others, men and women for others, is Father Arupe. And then Father Koldenak added for and with others. And then Father Nicholas added men and women for and with others, but men and women of depth. Mm-hmm. And I think every general adds on a little bit of his own personality, his own care, and depth was maybe the word that characterized him the most. With, like you said, the little light in the eyes, mm-hmm. as this man could have a good sense of humor.
Yes. He also coined the phrase, the globalization of superficiality. So this is why we need depth, is because everything is so superficial all the time. We just don't stop and reflect. We don't have time for any kind of personal prayer and reflection, self-knowledge, no discernment in common with others. So again, a great legacy that he leaves the Society of Jesus, and he leaves all Jesuit works.
Father Bill, would you say a few words for him?
Sure, happy to. So, gracious and loving God, please take Adolfo Nicholas into your arms. Greet him with great joy, the great joy that he is expecting to meet you with. Please, those of us who carry on the heritage he leaves us in the Society of Jesus, and the heritage he leaves all Jesuit works, help us to understand the universality of our mission, that we are all connected. And please, dear God, give us his spirit so that we will continue to search out the depths of our hearts, the depths of our own vision, and the depths of all that you call us to be. Amen.
Thank you. I'd like to start with that first Jesuit alumni conversation with you, Bill, and indeed maybe sketch briefly the background, the context of all this. We are in the middle of an unprecedented crisis. First, a sanitary crisis, the COVID-19 crisis, but which has now shown multiple ramifications, in perhaps all realms of human activity. This has led, among other things, to the fact that we are not able to travel and to see each other the way we were used. And so several international meetings for Jesuit alumni have been cancelled. And we thought that we could not simply, let weeks and months go by without doing anything. And so we came across the idea to basically start a new way of communicating with each other, which is a virtual one, and which is not a new one, because we've spoken about, going digital also in the preparation of our World Congresses for almost 2 Congresses in the past, and we never actually did it. Now, out of necessity, we are doing it. So out of an evil, there can be some good, emerging. And so the opportunity arises from the necessity and the crisis. So those digital conversations are about that. And the idea is, of course, to bring together in the same live session a Jesuit and a Jesuit alumnus. And moderated maybe by your humble servant, the president of WUJA. Now, of course, for today, I can serve in 2 capacities, being the moderator and being also one of the so many Jesuit alumni. But in coming live sessions, we may have each time a Jesuit and a Jesuit alumnus or Jesuit alumni, simply being experts or being very active in the domain we are going to speak about in the coming sessions. So today is more like an introductory session to that series of Jesuit alumni conversations. And I think we would be delighted to be able to discuss with you about, let's say, 3 different topics today. But before we start with the first one, I'd like to say to the people watching us that they can, of course, drop comments and questions on our Facebook group. We see those comments, we see these questions. We will try it to the extent possible to answer your comments and questions, but I see that there are already many of them on our chat box, so we won't be in the possibility to answer them all, but we'll try. So the first topic, Bill, I'd like to address with you is actually the topic on, let's say, the UAPs. UAPs is the acronym in the Jesuit jargon for Universal Apostolic Preferences. But before we do that, maybe a word about yourself, because you are the spiritual counselor of WUJA, that we know, but you have other capacities. And one of them, and the last one, is in time, I mean, is certainly of importance for the people watching this live session. So basically, who are you, Bill Muller?
Well, I'm a sinner and loved by God. How about that? I'll quote the Pope, and it's true. It's true. I was born and grew up in San Francisco in the Bay Area there in California. Went to a Jesuit high school, so I'm an alum. Joined the Jesuits right after high school 58 years ago, so I've been a Jesuit for 58 years. Did the normal formation of a Jesuit in those years, so it was half of it was pre-Vatican II, and the other half of it was post-Vatican II. Was ordained 47 years ago. Have had a number of teaching positions, been the principal of a school for a short time, president of 2 schools, number of province offices, formation director for the younger men, the provincial assistant for education. And now where I am in Washington, D.C. is the secretary for education for the Jesuit Conference of Canada and the United States, and the executive director of the Jesuit Schools Network of Canada and the United States, which is the umbrella organization for the 84 Jesuit schools we have in Canada and the United States, secondary and pre-secondary. Love what I'm doing. This is year 5, which was supposed to be a shorter term transition time. I was supposed to be the transition guy from one type of organization to another, but here it is, year 5. I got 1 more year left in this post, and then I hope back to my home province, which is Jesuits West. So that's me. Alain, who are you? You haven't introduced yourself yet.
Yeah, well, I'm Alain Deneef, president of the World Union of Jesuit Alumni. I was born in Brussels. I still live in Brussels, although I used to travel a lot, but that has changed the last 3 months for obvious reasons. I've had first, let's say, a corporate career for 15 years at the helm of rather big corporations. And then I became consultant, a board director by profession. And now I'm sharing, I would say, dividing my time between professional activities and then citizen-oriented or community-based activities, although my professional activities are of such a way, of such a nature, that they are very close also to community-based action and citizen-oriented action. So with me, let's say the border between both professional and non-professional activity is rather blurred. Okay, and I like it to be like that, So I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And on a very, very personal note, I've become the proud father of two little kids a few months ago. So as you can see, it is never too late to do well. And so I'm absolutely delighted about that. And of course, as you can imagine, what we call the containment, the fact of, the lockdown has forced me, but I take it as a grace to be with my kids, which may not have been the case if there had been no lockdown. So there's a good for an evil, and I take it as a grace. So thank you for asking the question. But indeed, we'd like to discuss about three topics today. And the first one is so important for the Society of Jesus in general. And these are both the universal apostolic preferences and then also the various forms of what we call reconciliation. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, Father? Knowing that the ultimate question for the Jesuit alumni and the friends who are watching us should be to look at what could be done, at what's going on out there that could, speak to us, based on this desire to search for reconciliation and to serve the Society of Jesus in the 4 UAPs. What is it about?
Well, it's about a lot of things, but I think most of all, it's about trying to find out how we Jesuits and Jesuit works, not just Jesuits, but the Jesuit works, which a big part of that is the alumni, how we can move the mission of reconciliation and justice further along in our world. So a couple of years ago, Father Sosa, the new Superior General, asked the Jesuit world and the works to think and pray and wonder and talk to one another about what ought to be some preferences into the future for the next 10 years or so. And these are not, he wasn't asking for a checklist, and he wasn't asking for, priorities, what do we do first or second or third. What he was asking for was, in my words, a stage to play on, I don't know whether these are his words or not, but we normally say the lens to look through. So what lenses are we going to look through to move the Society of Jesus and its works ahead for reconciliation and justice in the next number of years? Well, after 18 months of deliberation and consultation and discernment, he presented 4 preferences to Pope Francis, and Pope Francis said, yes, I mission the Society of Jesus and its works to have these 4 preferences for the next 10 years. And isn't it interesting that in this pandemic that we're in if it's taught us nothing else, it's taught us that we are one humanity and that there is gross inequality and there are justices that are demanded because of that inequality. So these 4 preferences feed right into exactly where we are. And I'm sure you're familiar with them. The first is to show the way to God through the spiritual exercises and Ignatian discernment. But as Father General keeps saying, the verb is most important, to show the way to God, to show the way to God. The second is to walk with those on the margins, those who are poor. In one moment here, we're all on the margins given the pandemic, but there are some who have been on the margins for ever so long, and we need to walk with them. Walk with them. We don't need to fix them. We certainly need to walk with them and do what we can. The third is to accompany youth in a creation of a hope-filled future. And alums, all of us we have to be very, very concerned about the young people in our schools right now. We need to accompany them. And again, it's not to fix them, and it's certainly not to tell them how we were when we were in school, but to accompany them so that they can create a hope-filled future. And this world we live in the past few years hasn't seen much hope, and certainly in the last few months. We need to be models of that hope And the fourth is care for our common home. The 5th anniversary of Laudato Si. Again, if this pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us that the world we live in, nature enfolds us, and how we care for each other and how we care for the world we live is going to make all the difference in the world. We are locked down, as it were, even sequestered from one another. It's interesting that Father Nicholas died on May 20th, because May 20th in 1521 was the Battle of Pamplona, when Ignatius of Loyola got run through with a cannonball. His leg got shattered, which forced him into seclusion, forced him to be by himself and alone, and was the opportunity, as awful as that experience was for him, it was the opportunity for him to come to terms with himself, to reflect, to find a depth, to wonder what his future might be. So on this anniversary of Pamplona, maybe we can use this pandemic as an opportunity to be still, to be quiet, to search out the depths within us, to understand that we are one humanity. As Father Nicholas would say, universality. We are all in this together. We need to rely on one another. We need to be with one another. So I think that's a great way to consider the universal apostolic preferences. And again, they're not just for Jesuits, they're for Jesuit works. Alain, does that ring true to your experience?
Absolutely. And I like your image of the cannonball of Pamplona forcing Ignatius into seclusion, into kind of a lockdown, as a matter of fact, lockdown with himself. And now we are in the midst of another lockdown because of the pandemic, and a lot of people worldwide, maybe 1, 2, 3 billion people, having been locked down at some point in time, have for sure, even only for a few seconds, have asked themselves questions on what is my life, what am I doing when a little virus can disturb and even destroy lives and the whole way of living that was ours. So I like this comparison, and of course maybe a sign that Father Adolfo Nicolas died on that date. Thank you for bringing that up. Lockdown is also a way for us to try maybe to reconcile ourselves with ourselves. But you are going to speak about 3 other ways of seeking for reconciliation. But maybe the first one could be with ourselves, don't you think?
Absolutely. Know thyself, the famous man said. An unreflected life is not worth living. And yes, but now these universal apostolic preferences are relatively recent. But in 2008, actually, when Father Nicholas was elected Superior General, the General Congregation, 35th of these congregations, happened in early 2008. And they, the fathers of that congregation, were very explicit that the mission of the Society of Jesus and its works is reconciliation and justice. And they posed 3 moments of reconciliation: reconciliation with God, reconciliation with one another, and reconciliation with creation. And it's really out of that reflection since 2008 that a lot of the discernment about the universal apostolic preferences happened because of that. Around the world, people's images of God differ, their understanding of God differs, but somehow or other, we need to come to terms with what is beyond us, what is way deep inside us, but that which we have no control over. God has been described in many, many different ways. Jesus in the gospel says God is our Father, is our parent, is the loving one who always loves us and cares for us and wants the best for us. Reconciliation with one another. I mean, all you have to do is walk across the street in most of our cities and you see conflict and division. Certainly here in the United States, it's gotten worse and worse and worse with the political divisiveness. I'm sure it's true in many parts of the world. How we treat one another, treat others as you would like them to treat you. Wouldn't it be nice if we followed that? So reconciliation with, and not just with the person next door who you had a fight with, but reconciliation of structures. So many societies have so many communities have structural differences and biases and structural evils and injustices. We need to address that. And then finally, reconciliation with creation. Our world is falling apart. Laudato Si, if you haven't read Pope Francis's description about how we take care of the earth, please do so. It's not that long a document, but it is really informative and it is really provocative. So I'd urge you to do that. Anyway, so the General Congregation in 2008, which elected Father Nicholas, said our mission is reconciliation and justice. And the three biggies are reconciliation with God, with one another, and with creation. But I'm sure, Alain, had you been there, they would have listened to you and said, well, of course we start at home. Of course we start with ourselves. We need to know ourselves, accept ourselves, be reconciled to our gifts, our talents, our deficiencies, and make the best of the life that has been given. Because it's all gift. Our life is all gift.
Father Bill, I think the articulation between the four UAPs and the three forms, or maybe four forms of reconciliation, are an excellent example on how the society and its successive superior generals build upon each other. Because it all comes from Father Arupe. I think we all agree on that in many respects. I mean, in recent and modern times, of course. I'm not going back to Ignatius, of course. But starting from Father Arupe, then we have indeed Father Nicholas speaking about reconciliation in various forms, and then Father Arturo Sosa launching that incredible collective discernment exercise leading to the four universal apostolic preferences. Is it typical of the way of working of the society to build upon what the predecessors have done, or is it a little chance here?
Oh, I think it's the Holy Spirit. I think it's nature and nurture, right? It's one thing always leads to another. And sometimes we make good choices and follow a path that leads us to something better. Sometimes we don't. But yes, I think this re-understanding of communal discernment, what it means for a bunch of people to discern together, that's hearkening back to the first companions of Ignatius and what they did, which might not have been done the way Father Sosa has done it in the recent past. It's a great light that he has shown on communal discernment, and a great opportunity he has called us all to. Yes, we need to make our own individual discernments, but if we're in some project together or some mission, particularly missions of reconciliation and justice, we need to discern together where the Spirit is leading us.
Yeah, and Father Bill, for the advantage of the people watching us, I have to say that WUJA, as a body, the body of the Jesuit alumni worldwide, has engaged into a process of collective discernment. We copied, I have to say very humbly, we copied what the Jesuits had done 2 years before, but we started, and we started, of course, from the Council of WUJA, so 18 people, and then cascading down to, the continents, the continental confederations, the national federations, even the local associations. And there we try to have some collective discernment. because individual discernment is key, but there can also be collective discernment when you work inside an organization, and especially a very widespread organization, maybe thin and tiny on the surface, but still very much with many ramifications everywhere in the world. So this is going on, and this should, of course, culminate during the World Congress in Barcelona in July 2021, when, of course, we will offer to the community of Jesuit alumni worldwide the result of this collective discernment exercise we will have pursued for 1.5 years before that Congress. So just for the information of the people who are watching us, and actually, if people watching us want to organize at the level where they are, their local association, or maybe a prayer group, or maybe their National Federation of Jesuit Alumni, if they want to organize such a collective exercise, they should not hesitate. And of course, we are there also to answer the questions on how to do it. Okay, that's important, so that fruit can be born from a little bit everywhere in the world. But Father Bill, with your permission, I'd like to come back on discernment, but then more on an individual basis, because everything we said about helping the society with the 4 UAPs, trying to mold ourselves into the various forms of reconciliation, cannot start without a personal, individual discernment. And I think that ultimately the question Jesuit alumni could ask themselves is, well, look around yourself of what could be done in this world of ours, in this world of today, in this difficult world. Look around yourself about what could be done. Isn't that the question at this stage we should suggest to our fellow Jesuit alumni?
Sure. The action is always the next step, right? So, and again, discernment isn't just a handy-dandy way to do decisions. It's a way to find out where we ought to be making the best choices in our lives. Where is the Spirit of God leading us? And it's going to lead us someplace. I mean, we're not just going to sit in our rooms and twiddle our thumbs all day long. This might be a roundabout way to answer your question, but I am the Jesuit world is divided into 6 geographies, and each geography has a delegate for secondary and pre-secondary education. So I'm the delegate for Canada and the United States. Well, my counterparts in the 5 other regions, we get together on the phone occasionally, and we meet in person once a year, which is where I'm supposed to be right now, but nobody can travel. So we had one of our meetings this morning earlier with Father Jose Mesa, who's Father General's assistant for education. Well, my counterpart from India, Father Sunny Jacob, was talking about some of the things that his alumni groups in India have been doing. For instance, there's a group of Xavierites, I think they are, from Xavier High School in West India. They package 10,000 food packs a day for people who are hungry and don't have food. There's an alumni association in the eastern part of Africa, and they distribute supplies to over 1,000 families so far. And then he talked about in the southern part of Africa, our alums are helping to staff a Corona care center that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So there's always something that can be done. We need not be guilty if we can't do everything. And if your opportunity, you may think in your mind's eye is slight compared to what I just talked about, it's not. It's not, because everything helps. And if you're able to do anything, certainly do something. So that's where it starts. It starts with being aware of your local situation. It starts by looking around and seeing what your gifts and talents might lead you to be able to do to help others. And then that way we make a difference little by little.
Bill, we will come back on several initiatives that have taken place worldwide. But there's an interesting question that's been asked to us, and it's been now readable on the screen. Someone asks us if the pandemic is not maybe slightly shifting the way we could have envisaged those 4 UAPs. In other words, are there things that have changed so dramatically with this pandemic that maybe not the UAPs should be changed for sure, because they are there for 10 years and they are the fruit of a collective discernment, but at the least that the way they are being put into motion and practice and operation could be slightly adapted because of the pandemic. Would you think of examples about that?
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. And many of the folks listening may be familiar with the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm, which starts with context. We always start with context. So these 4 universal apostolic preferences don't mean anything unless they mean something at your front door. What is your context? What is your reality? What is your community's reality? If you're in an alumni association, what together can you think of that would address the needs or the injustices or move reconciliation further along in your neighborhood? So yes, I absolutely. We don't do any of this in a vacuum or pretending that the world is hunky-dory, because it's not. But we have to start with our own particular context. Is that what you're referring to, Alain?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was one of the questions asked to us, and indeed we could not, I would say, intellectually, but even I would say psychologically, imagine that UAPs would be, very strict and fixed and formatted, concepts, not adaptable to the needs of the moment. So your answer is right on. So thank you for that. Coming back on what is happening worldwide at the level of Jesuits, but also at the level of Jesuit alumni, I think maybe we have a map of what's going on worldwide regarding this. But the number of initiatives that have flourished, you can see it on the map, is absolutely striking. Most of them triggered and initiated by Jesuits, but of course helped by Ignatian friends and Jesuit alumni and people who are none of these, but still are close to the Jesuits. But some of these initiatives also emanate from the Jesuit alumni world. And as a matter of fact, I would think of another initiative coming from Spain, and that's No Estás Solo. You are not alone. So that's the name of the operation, and that's an initiative to have people taking care of other people who are isolated, especially in graying populations. And in Europe, we tend to be grayer than many other places in the world. There are a lot of people living all alone, and that's a real problem in normal times. But this becomes totally it can take catastrophic proportions when in times of total isolation and lockdown. So No Estás Solo was a way to mobilize people, including Jesuit alumni and including even pupils in the schools, to come and help, isolated people, elderly, etc. But they were trained to do so because there are ways of doing that, and there are things to be done and things you should not do. So there was a whole process being put together, and that's another initiative. This time from Europe. And maybe you are aware of other initiatives also, Father. So that's great. At least we are both back and to be heard by the people. And sorry for the people watching for this technical glitches. So I was just saying, Bill, that maybe the call to action for the Jesuit alumni is the fact that they should look around them and see what's happening in initiatives generated by Jesuits, but maybe by other people, and simply say, I'm going to join my forces with the ones of others. So that was the call to action to conclude the part number 2 in our conversation. Part number three is to speak about upcoming conversations we may have, maybe with a rhythm, maybe with a rhythm of one per month. We could have those sessions, and the various sessions we have in mind, and maybe we have here a table showing what we could speak about. We could speak about themes as different as migration, education, discernment, climate change, digital transition, the very specific response to the COVID-19 crisis, social justice, and maybe also inside Rome. And inside Rome would be more a glimpse at what's really happening inside the Vatican in the midst of this unheard crisis. The idea would be that we would tackle those topics, as I said, and I repeat, a Jesuit and a Jesuit alumnus or alumni, but we would give it a double spin. When we would speak about these topics, we would try to do it in a way that links it to the current COVID-19 crisis, because as we can imagine, not one of these topics will be left untouched by the current crisis. So education will have to adapt itself. Migration, there's another look to have at migration. We know that the crisis, the sanitary crisis, has provoked additional migrations, just to avoid being locked down in a city. And we have seen that in India, for instance. So all of this are themes that will be impacted by the crisis, and we want that to be part of our conversations. And then the second element, the second spin we would like to give to the coming conversations is the fact that we have a World Congress of Jesuit Alumni next July 2021, so next year. So in about 15 months from now. And we want it to be a great success. And you see here the logo of this Congress to be held in Barcelona, a very Jesuit friendly city, as we all know, with a lot of high schools and universities. So the Congress to be held there will be absolutely terrific. I'm sure of that. But we would like to prepare it with those digital conversations. So each time we will address one of the topics I just mentioned on the previous slide. We would do it regarding the preparation of a climax, the climax being the Congress of Barcelona as such. So you can see again these topics we may tackle in the near future. And I don't know if Father Bill Muller is still with us and can be seen and heard.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. So maybe, Bill, could you maybe elaborate a little bit on these topics and based on what I just said?
Well, they're all critical. It's going to be interesting, Alain, how you decide the order, the sequence, because they're all very critical right now. And I would say how you pick people. We have so many alums who are doing so much good work on the front lines of all those. I'm thinking of the migration issue. the Jesuit refugee service, Father Tom Smolich, works with so many different laymen and laywomen. That would be a great conversation to have. And that is a critical issue in so many parts of the world.
Indeed, and as a case in point, maybe Bill, you could simply describe briefly what the impact of COVID-19 might be on your network of high schools in the US. When we were in conversation a few days ago, you said, well, our schools were not totally unprepared for this lockdown situation because they had some, rescue plans, if I may say so. Could you tell us more about that?
Sure, be happy to. And I'm sure this is in many of our schools around the world, all 800 of our schools around the world. Some of our schools nobody was expecting a pandemic, clearly. But some of our schools in certain parts of the United States, they have their preparations for earthquakes, for floods, for massive winter storms, for tornadoes, for hurricanes. So a number of our schools that have been fairly well resourced, they have years ago started digital learning programs, so learning or distance learning programs. So a number of our schools, when the pandemic happened, they made a very easy switch. I'd say of our 84 schools in the Jesuit Schools Network, well, I'd say 20 were pretty prepared just to make a switch. Now they had to learn by doing it because it wasn't just for a couple of days, it's been a couple of months. The other schools have learned from them. All our schools are doing terrific work, not just continuing learning, but continuing to have a core personalistic care for their students. It is remarkable what the women and men in our schools do over and above teaching. For instance, our school in Omaha, Nebraska, the coaches, because they can't coach right now, they signed up to phone every family once a week so that there'd be some connection and not just a kid going to class digitally, but there'd be some human connection from the school to check up. So how you doing? Is everything okay? Anything we can do to help? So many examples of that. The issue more is going to be the economy in the fall, particularly for our nativity schools, which are schools that have, elementary, but usually 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. For poor people, for poor kids, there's no tuition. They rely exclusively on donations. So if benefactions can't come through, then that's going to be a problem. Our Cristo Rey schools these are high schools, but it's the work-study program. And again, exclusively for poorer families. If the corporate sponsor, who perhaps has just laid off 20 people or put 30 people on furlough, is that corporate sponsor willing to hire a couple of teenagers to come when he has disrupted his whole company? And the corporate sponsorships, the work-study program pays for up to 50% of the school's expenses. So that, I think in the fall, it's going to be a little bit of a problem. Even some of our more traditional legacy schools, they don't have big endowments. And as you know, the stock market has been in a whirlwind, up and down again. So some of the schools are going to have some real concerns in the fall. Redoing budgets, not allowing certain programs to save some money, etc. Yeah.
So Bill, thank you for this this comment. I think our friends watching us have understood that you are with us via an audio line, via phone, but not directly via video. But we hear you perfectly well, and thank you for continuing being with us. Your comment is really interesting because I may not have said while I was presenting myself at the beginning of this live session, that I'm also the president of a Jesuit high school in Brussels, which opened its doors last September. And so we have known the same lockdown situation as your 60 high schools back in the States. And what really makes the difference for the pupils and their parents is when in a situation of lockdown, you don't simply abandon the people. You continue following them up. You call them, you give them work, you take good care of them, what we call in Latin the cura personalis, and that makes the difference. And I think in our case, it is going to bring us more students next September in the school, because the rumor has it that at the Matteo Ricci School, that's the name of the school in Brussels, we take care of people and we don't abandon them. I suppose it's the same back in the States.
Yes, exactly. In fact, our school in Seattle reports that parents with kids not at Seattle Preparatory School, but in a public school, have been phoning and saying, can I get my kid in your school? Because you're continuing classes, you're continuing learning, and you're taking care of the kids in your school. Whereas my school, I don't mean to demean the public system, but my school isn't doing anything right now. And here's the other side of the coin for us in our Jesuit schools, and I'm sure this is around the world. At the public schools, the students have to come back. In a Jesuit school where they're paying tuition, they don't have to come back. So we need to go way beyond to be sure that we are caring for these kids and their families so that they will want to come back.
Yeah, that's a great example of care for others. And thank you for sharing that with us. Father, we have been talking for an hour now, and we've pretty much covered our topics of today. I think it was very important to see from where we were starting, and again, these are, you know, the discernment exercise, the UAPs, the various ways of searching for reconciliation. But really, and that's what I was telling our friends watching us when we had those technical problems and you disappeared and then I disappeared and then we reappeared, both of us. That was the call to action, basically, because contemplation for action is really one of the great Jesuit mottos. But, you know, just contemplating for the sake of contemplating and then not doing anything is not exactly what is being demanded from us. So what would be your take at that? Is it simply for our Jesuit alumni to rush to any initiative around the corner, or what would you recommend they do in these extraordinary times?
Yeah. Well, again, context is all. So it depends on the context that the alum finds him or herself in. But I would say the trick is to match your talent to a need. So if you've got a talent and you see a need in your area that you can attach yourself to, then that's the first step. Again, we were trying more and more at Father Sosa's instigation to do more things in common. So to get an alumni group together and let them look around the community they live in. What needs to be done? What is it that our talents could bring to bear? And then there are some things that are more important than other things, you know? So my hunch is that feeding people in a soup kitchen is more important right now than picking up trash in the neighbor's yard. Water issues in many parts of the world are critical. How we deal in parts of the world where medicine is scarce So there are some things more important than other things, and that ought to be, that's right from Ignatius too. You know, where can you have the most impact? That's what you ought to be doing.
Father Bill, there is a comment by a Facebook friend saying that alumni will have to play a role in the community needs as a consequence of the pandemic, especially in leveraging experiences. I think it is a great comment because times of crisis are generally times of great confusion, you know, in the minds and hearts of people, and probably where some of our alumni could be useful, maybe because they have had, you know, the good luck and the chance to be well educated, and that is to bring some discernment, or even more modestly, some analytical skills into trying to see what is important in what's happening with what is not important or accessory. Isn't that also a contribution Jesuit alumni could bring in their local communities or at different levels, where they could really bring their skills, their expertise, their analysis in trying to make a little clearer something that could be very confusing for most of the people?
Sure, absolutely. It is interesting to note that many of alums around the world are in helping professions, and not just doctors and nurses, but scientists and all the so-called frontline workers on this pandemic. But yes, you're absolutely right. Many of our alums have the benefit of great education that could bring to bear and volunteer their help in trying to analyze the situation, get their neighborhoods organized, be sure older people who live on their own are have enough food. You know, there are all sorts of things that neighbors can do in neighborhoods that our folks, our alums, might be not better suited, but by inclination, because they're Jesuit trained, they're Ignatian missionaries, you know, would be not just able to do, but generously willing to do.
Bill, exactly. And I was struck to see that in various countries, the people who are the front persons to explain to the population what's going on and what one should do and should not do in these times of pandemic, that these people are Jesuit alumni. The most famous of them is certainly your fellow compatriot, Tony Fauci, you know, chief epidemiologist, you know, having had, you know, a lot of problems with your president, as we all know. But he was really a most admired person by the American population. And we have the same in Congo with Denis Muyembe, the chief epidemiologist, the guy who fought against, you know, Ebola and successfully, and now in charge of trying to contain the pandemic in Congo. And it's exactly the same in Belgium. One of the two spokespersons we have is an alumnus of my own high school. Isn't that remarkable? Isn't that a contribution our alumni can give also into public debate where there is so much confusion?
Yes, absolutely. And I think, isn't one of your dreams to compile a book of Jesuit alums through the ages that have made great contributions to the societies they've lived in? And surely, when you get around to doing that, the two you just talked about will have their own place of honor, I'm sure. But yes, no, that's absolutely right, and I think we're called upon to do that. I mean, it's not just a great Jesuit education that, you know, makes us feel better, but it's the prompt to be women and men with and for others, and careful with how we treat people, and it's not just me, myself, and I, and it's not just my little home in the corner of the neighborhood. It's the common good. You know, what are we doing for the common good? And isn't that what justice is all about? And the inequalities that are around the world, even in the happiest and best places, the structural inequalities really do have to be addressed. And we given the educations that we've received, it's incumbent on us to be a part of the solution for those things.
Thank you. So actually, you see the intellectual contribution or the media contribution of our Jesuit alumni as a form of action after contemplation. So it is as worthwhile and as worthy as, you know, I don't know, visiting people or delivering masks and material in hospitals. You see that also as a very valid contribution?
Oh, absolutely. I even think being a politician is a honorable thing. You know, I may not like some of our current politicians, but yeah, to work for the common good, to have a broader vision, have a giraffe vision, you know, and see beyond the little petty things that go on in each of our lives. Yes, my goodness, what is this universality and depth that Father Nicholas kept talking about? If not that, being engaged in the common weal, you know, in the betterment, and all the way from Ignatius, you know, starting schools for the betterment of the community, not just for the individual person to be better educated, but so that the whole community could benefit from that person's education. Pardon my soapbox. I feel like I'm on a soapbox because I can see you, but I see this awful picture of me there. I don't know how I'm best communicating here.
You know, we hear you very well, and we see your image, so we know who is speaking. And thank you for still being with us. Time flies, Bill. And it is we're nearing now the end of this first live session. I'd like maybe before giving you the final conclusion, I'd like to remind the people watching us that this live session is being recorded as we speak. So it is playable again on the same Facebook group of WUJA. So if you think it was worth watching, please tell your friends, send them a Facebook share or message or an email, and tell them that this live session can be watched and played again, and will remain so on our Facebook group. As soon as we have more info about the upcoming live sessions, on various topics we described and we discussed already, and they appear again on the screen. So each time with a Jesuit alumnus, we'll tell you, we'll promote it, and so we hope that many of the people watching and many more to come will attend those next live sessions. Bill, maybe as a word of conclusion, what would you say to the people watching us? We don't know how many are watching us. We'll know later on when we have the statistics coming from Facebook. But probably there were quite a sizable amount of them, which is great for first attempt. What would you tell them about the importance of the exercise we are now doing of uniting people, albeit virtually, worldwide?
We live in a global community, and we Jesuits and Jesuit works, we need to understand that more and more and more. We are part of this world, and we are called to help the world be better. Let me as a caution to those that Alain may want to be on this program, The reason I'm on this program is because I told Alain this was a terrific idea and he ought to do it. And the next thing I know, he says, well, good. Then the first one, it's you and me. So be careful if Alain knocks on your door. But if he knocks on your door, I hope you will say yes, because it's this kind of thing that will continue to connect us, help us understand each other, bring the world to our front door. So all that is wonderful. Also, particularly given this odd world situation of the pandemic, we all need a little patience. We all need a little courage. We all need a little lightness of spirit. We need some joy, and we can find that in one another. One of my favorite now poets from England, Kate Tempest is her name, and she has a poem called People's Faces. And the recurrent refrain is, there is so much peace to be found in people's faces. So I hope you found a little bit of peace in our faces, and I hope you will, in your mind's eye, in your imagination, see Father Nicholas, see your family, your friends, people you haven't been able to see for a while. Bring them to your imagination and let them bring you some peace.
Thank you, Father Bill, for these kind and wise and rejoicing words. It is now time, I think, to say goodbye momentarily to our friends. Those conversations, if successful, could happen also in French and Spanish in the future. Obviously, we held the first conversation in English for reasons of universality, but there are other languages being spoken a lot in the Society of Jesus and in the world of Jesuit alumni, so we would be delighted to be able to host also conversations in French and in Spanish and maybe in other languages if some people so wish. Thank you so much, Father Bill, for being with us. Your words were so enlightening, and thank you for leveraging on the incredible heritage of that great Jesuit who passed away a few hours ago, Father Adolfo Nicolas. We dedicate this live session to him, and I'm sure it will guide us in the weeks and months to come in the next Jesuit alumni conversations. This was the first one. Thank you to all the people who have watched us despite the technical problems we have had. And thank you so much, Father Bill, for being with us. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Be good.